This morning's passage is actually a continuation of last week's from Matthew's gospel and story about Jesus declaring to his disciples for the first time that his journey would lead to Jerusalem, where he would suffer and be crucified, and on the third day be raised. Really, it serves as the fulcrum, the pivot point by which the door or the lever is moved that changes the disciples' whole understanding of who Jesus is and what he is called to do, and changes the whole understanding of what they are called to do. And it as well changes, as the pivot point, all the world in the doing of it. May God give us an ear and a heart to understand this word. From Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 through 26. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and religious people, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you." But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me, for you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what he has done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So you have to admit, it's not a great business plan. Jesus says, "I'm going to Jerusalem as the Messiah. And rather than freeing Jerusalem from Roman rule, I'm going to subject myself to the powers and principalities there of both the religious people and the Roman people, where I will suffer and be crucified, and on the third day rise again. Your job is to follow me. Pick up your cross and follow me." And Peter's response is the only honest one. "No, not you, Lord." Because Peter's responding out of his own awareness and fear that if it means, as a follower of Jesus, that Jesus will go through this, then Peter, as a disciple, must go through it as well. Peter obviously had trouble with this even up until the last day, as he refused to understand what it meant to pick up your cross and follow Jesus that dark night when he denied being one of Jesus' disciples 3 times before the cock crowed. So how do you make sense of this? If it's true that the disciples who knew him best, who Peter, who knew him better than any apparently, or that Jesus knew better than any, for he gave him the keys of the kingdom, and he said, "Upon you I will build my church." If the disciples and Jesus didn't understand the plan, how would anyone else? Turns out that what looks like a terrible marketing scheme ends up being the greatest hope in history. Why? Why? Well, certainly the resurrection has something to do with it, but I think that's not the primary reason. I think mainly because of what came through Jesus' suffering, what came by the cross, what came in the cross, which, of course, for us as Christians is an awareness, a confession that at this moment, God's unconditional love for us will never end. That God takes our lives so seriously, in fact, that he is willing to suffer unto death to show us that. And because God calls for us to follow this way of suffering and love in order for us to take our own lives seriously. And we have to admit it, I think, in our place of truest heartfelt reflection, we have to admit that our deepest need is to find some place to serve where we are not just serving ourselves. Jesus says the law is clear. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. And deep down, made in the image of God, until we can give ourselves over to those two loves, love of God and love of neighbor, we will always be looking for something beyond us. So as far as marketing goes, there's this paradoxical strategy that okay, the more you pay for something, the more it's worth. And marketers know that. So the higher the cost, the more you want it. So if you drive around in a Maserati and wear a Rolex watch, it shows others that you are successful enough to afford it. The more it costs, the more you are worth. But this is just transactional analysis, economics. Some religious institutions understand this too, this marketing scheme. The prosperity gospel comes to mind. For the cost of committing your life to Jesus Christ and writing checks to our ministry, all your problems will be resolved, even your money woes. Why else did Jesus teach us to pray, Father, forgive us our debts? Or take those churches that sit on the edge of their seats waiting for Jesus to come again and take them up, the chosen up, the elect up in rapture before the apocalyptic ending of the world. And the scheme goes, we who are saved will finally be lifted up out of our suffering and hardship and distress on earth, and will be finally moved, raptured into our reward and bliss in heaven. But if you take that seriously, what they're saying is, we're not going to carry the cross, we're just going to lay the suffering of the cross onto everybody else as we get lifted up, suffering free. Jesus said, you want real life? Real abundant life, flourishing life, wholeness of life. You want that? Pick up your cross and follow me. My way. This is the way of truth and the way of love. It is the way of life itself. And no one comes to God except by this way, is what he was meaning. It's a way of love, of suffering love, of self-sacrifice for something greater than ourselves, for the sake of others, for creation. And then he says, when I come back, even before you die, he's not talking about the apocalyptic rapture, he's talking about coming again in this world now, which Christ does all the time. When he comes back, even before we die, we will reap the reward of learning how to live this way, this life abundant, by our suffering servanthood. Did you notice in this passage that Jesus did not say, pick up my cross and follow me? Jesus bore his cross alone, and that was enough for all eternity. He said, pick up your cross and follow me. Or it could just as well say crosses. For some reason I don't understand, nobody understands, some people have more crosses to bear than others. And if we are honest, we have to claim that we have more than one too. I think there are basically two kinds of crosses. The first kind is the kind that we don't choose. We don't pick it up. It picks us up. It's given to us. It may be a handicap or disability that we live with, or one of our loved ones. It may be a bad hand that we're dealt. It may be part of a gene pool, or the place we're born into, or the race we're born into, or the identity that we're born into that feels by culture's disrespect that we constantly carry the cross of that. It may be a trauma or a tragedy that finds us. These crosses, they're there, and the longer we live our lives, the more these crosses are going to make their way into them. Even for those who spend their lives trying to avoid them, the pain and suffering through, there are a million ways, alcohol and narcotics and television and entertainment. Even then, it only creates more suffering rather than alleviates it. These kinds of crosses cannot be avoided, denied, and buried. They just stand there, firmly planted in the ground of our being, waiting to be acknowledged and picked up, and by God's grace, carried as best we can. But not alone. Earlier in Matthew 11, speaking of these kinds of crosses, Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." And what he's saying is you don't have to carry that cross by yourself, those crosses alone. He's saying, let me help you carry it. Yoked to Christ, like two cows yoked together to pull the plow, Christ will help us if we ask. It takes me usually only coming to my knees before I give up and ask. It takes me usually surrendering because I'm too darn prideful to say I need Christ or anybody else in my life to make it better. But in those times of grace, when I have no other choice to lift up my heart and hands to Christ and ask him to come and help me carry the burden, I have found, looking back especially, that he did. And I have heard story after story from you of similar ways. We have heard it said that God never gives us more than we can bear. I don't know that that's in the Bible. I'm sure it is probably. But the real meaning to that is that God never gives us more than God can bear. And as God bears it up with us, the two of us, all of us can bear it together. Our crosses that are given are made lighter by the yoke of Christ. But that said, there's a second kind of cross in this morning's passage that I think it especially points to. When Jesus calls us to pick up our cross and follow him, I think he means those crosses that we have a choice to pick up or not. We don't have to. We can walk by them and go our way. We can avoid them like the pandemic. We can cover our noses and mouths, mask them, but also our eyes and ears, not to acknowledge that they exist. We can sequester ourselves in our little social systems and never get outside our boxes of security. And it's not going to go away, though, because once we become aware, you see, once the defense is down, it's still there, and it may be the cross of injustice or racism or disadvantaged children or education. It may be carrying the cross of healthcare and medicine or ministry or working hard at a no-interest job to support your family. It may be a cross of climate change or economic equity or health care, as I said, and a cross of helping to carry an economy that can support good jobs. But whatever the cause, for love's sake, that gives us purpose and meaning in life, this is the cross that we are called to pick up and carry in order to follow the way of Jesus. We don't have to. There are 1,000 reasons not to, but they're still there, planted, beckoning us to pick them up and to bring servanthood to them and meaning to us. Jesus knew that we cannot fully live our lives as truly ourselves, our true image of God's selves, unless we give ourselves over to a cause that is greater than ourselves, a purpose or a mission that calls us to step out, to follow Jesus, even if it's toward the cross. In the end, those disciples discovered this before it was too late. Even Peter, especially Peter. In the image of God, Jesus knows we are not complete, living only for ourselves. We must give ourselves up to serve something greater than ourselves, for this is the way of Jesus. I was reminded of this last summer after I retired from ministry after, almost 37 years or something. And I thought I was going to do something in the healthcare world. I had been working with some physicians and other healthcare professionals, working with burnout issues and compassion fatigue. And I thought I would do that professionally with a hospital setting, but COVID hit and all of that just sort of fell through the cracks. And so I was left feeling like, what is my purpose? Now, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? I felt the need to do something beyond just playing golf twice a week and yard work. And so I began to wonder, what would it be? And so it happened. And it happened, strangely enough, through this country western sage named Marty Stewart. Here's the story. Anita and I were introduced to Marty Stewart as we watched the Ken Burns documentary on country music last year. And we learned what a philosopher historian he was. We fell in love with him, and he's this incredible mandolin player. He was this child prodigy. At 13, he began playing in Earl Scruggs' band and even in the Grand Ole Opry. Last October, when Amanda and the Grands were down in Jacksonville, we learned that Marty Stewart was going to be in Jacksonville, and so I decided to go online, Ticketmaster, get a couple of tickets, and send Amanda and Anita off to the concert while I took care of the grandkids that night. And off they went. I couldn't wait for them to come back to find out how well the concert went. When they came back, they were gobsmacked. Anita was deeply moved, saying that somehow we've got to figure out a way to get me to go see them because they're that good. And Amanda said, who is really a good judge of these things, she goes to every festival within a 500-mile radius of Knoxville, Tennessee, it was the best concert I have ever seen. Later in January, we learned that Marty was coming to Birmingham. He was also in the town that we needed to come to see some family members, and so we decided that we should go. So I went online to look for tickets. He was playing in the Lyric Theater, which I didn't know anything about. The best I could figure out was the only good tickets left by then were on the third row in the balcony, which I went ahead and ordered. Oh well, it's not 4 rows from the front like Anita's experience in Jacksonville, but it's still in the theater. But while online, we discovered that he had this other offering called the Big Chief Special. And for $75, which was twice as much as the tickets cost, you would be entitled to come early and visit personally with Marty Stewart and his fabulous Superlatives band. Ask questions, hear a little acoustic music, and then attend the show later. I hesitated, but it was close to Valentine's Day, and I knew it would mean a lot for Anita, and so I splurged the $150 and got the Big Chief special tickets. When we got to Birmingham, we got to the show an hour and a half early because we really didn't have any directions about when it would all start, and we're hanging around outside, but the doors are closed, and there are 4 or 5 other people out there with us, and the whole thing, I gotta tell you, seemed a little sketch. I mean, the people hanging out there seemed a little sketch. Not Anita and me, of course, they did. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I was anxious. And soon the doors opened and the ushers led us into a theater, and it was dark, and we were seated on the front 2 rows, and there were 15 of us or so, and Marty and the Superlatives come out, and they introduce themselves, and they play a couple of acoustic songs that just were amazing. I mean, they were not really much farther away than social distancing. I mean, they were like 10 feet away from us. We're just sitting there like, this is unbelievable. And we had our little Big Chief badge hanging around our necks. And then he says, I'd like for you to, you have any questions? Let's just talk. And one of the people there, she was a middle-aged woman. When we were standing out front, she looked like she had been through hell and high water. She looked like she had suffered a lot in her life. She was in a wheelchair, and I guess her husband had brought her, and she raised her hand and she said, Marty, I just wanted to tell you that we drove 5 hours to come to this concert because I wanted to tell you how much you changed my life. Oh yeah? Tell me the story. She said, well, I fell in love with your music, and then I learned that you got sober and you also became a Christian. And because I loved you so much, I decided to get sober and become a Christian too. And I've been sober and I've been a Christian for 3 years now, and I just wanted to come and thank you for that. It was like spiritual goosebumps, breaking out all over us as we're in this dark theater talking. And by that time, I'm the preacher, so I've already started to formulate my question. So a couple of other people asked questions I wasn't paying too much attention to. And then I raised my hand. I said, Marty, could you share with us a little about your faith journey and how you came to Christ? And I was sitting right here, and he stared at me. It seemed like forever. He stared through me, looking at me. And then he said, good question. Then he stared some more, and he said, I have to say that I think I found Christ and I got sober, and it was the same event. And there's no way to really separate the two. And he's still staring at me. And I'm like, mm-hmm. And he's staring at me, and then he says, what do you do? I'm a Presbyterian preacher. I'm retired. Oh, yeah? Good for you. I didn't know preachers could retire. Just laid that cross right on my lap. I found that a little curious. Ministers don't retire. Then he turned around to his band and said, okay, that deserves a song we need to play. So they picked up their instruments and they began to play, Let Us Have a Little Talk with Jesus. Let us tell him about our troubles. He will hear our faintest cry. He will answer by and by. When you feel a little prayer returning, you will know his fire is burning. You will find a little talk with Jesus makes it right. And it was like, oh, I guess I need a little talk with Jesus. A couple of weeks later, in early March, COVID had become clear everywhere, and Anita and I, like everyone else, were getting anxious and worried about what was going to happen, but also we were praying for God to give us some kind of cross to carry. We knew we needed to serve, wanted to serve some way. I've come to see in my life that I need a place to serve, and I need a challenge, and and I need structure, and a little money is helpful too. And so on March the 7th, my prayer group met, 4 other older men, mentor-like men, and one of them asked me, how's the search going for your next gig? I said, well, not too good, to tell you the truth. I can't seem to get any traction. I'm just sort of spinning my wheels. And so he says, well, have you thought about broadening your church greater than just healthcare professionals? I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there you could be doing. I said, well, actually, I have sort of started thinking about it. I tried to tell him about Marty Stewart. And then I said, would y'all pray about this for me? And that was on March the 7th, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At 8 o'clock that evening on March the 7th, the phone rings, and the voice on the other end says, this is Bill Carl. And I said, the Bill Carl? The insufferable Greek school professor that almost flunked me out of seminary, Bill Carl? He goes, oh, it really wasn't that bad. I said, yeah, it was. He goes, what did you make on your exam? I said, 70. Yeah, it was that bad, he said. After some catching up, he went on to tell me that he had gotten my name from a couple of people and wondered if I might be interested in serving Independent Presbyterian Church as an interim pastor as you look for your next pastor. And I said, I'm really honored they gave you my name and privilege, but actually I'm really not interested in doing an interim, and I'm especially not interested in doing an interim out of town. But thank you so much. But tell me about the church and what's going on, and maybe in hearing that I can help you find somebody that might be. For the next 2 hours, I listened to Bill Carl tell me all of the good and all of the not so good about Independent Presbyterian Church. He gave me the history, the recent history, the past history. He shared the dirty laundry. He owned his own mistakes. He told everything. And I thought, well, golly, I mean, what kind of a marketing scheme is that? I mean, he's telling me all the bad stuff as well as the good stuff to try to convince me. But I thought, that must be true if he's telling me all this. Wow, what a challenge, I thought. What a challenge and what a great church. I'm surely glad that I'm not going to be the one to have to do it. And then near the end, he said, oh, by the way, confidentially, one of our associates, Brian Lays, happens to be talking to your old church, Riverside Presbyterian. And I just went, really? Seriously? The coincidence of this? I got off the phone, went up to Anita and said, you want to go to Birmingham? We were just there. I said, no, I mean for like longer than that. I just got a call from Independent Presbyterian Church asking me if I'd think about being their interim pastor. What a joke. Like I would move from Jacksonville, you would move, no. Great church. But here's what you need to know. Their associate might be going to Riverside. And Anita goes, that'd be an irony. Y'all might pass on the way. You're going to Birmingham and he's coming to Jacksonville. We just laughed. It was absurd. But the next day I woke up curious. I was born here. I lived here till I was 6. I didn't have a great time here, as you've heard in another sermon. I had some issues I had to deal with and work out, but maybe this was an opportunity to do that. Besides, Anita had grown up here. We have family here. We'd asked friends to pray. I was starting to wonder if I was actually having a little talk with Jesus. So later, I went online and looked up Independent Presbyterian Church and read all I could about it and what an incredible church this is and all that you do, and a history of Henry Edmonds and how he started the church, and part of it was on Sunday evenings he would go down to the Lyric Theater and have worship where African Americans, they called them Negroes then, would be allowed into the church, but they had to sit in the balcony, and where people from off the street were invited in, even women of the night, where he would pastor them and care for them and give them hope and love. The Lyric Theater, of all places, can you imagine? Yep, Jesus seems to be talking a lot here. That night, I prayed some more. and figured out that I probably should take this more seriously. And so I let Bill know later that I was interested. And for a month in this conversation with an amazingly wonderful search committee, I heard myself, and Anita heard me, being called to serve you as your interim. Later she said, I knew it was the right thing to do because your energy level and excitement level grew exponentially. I needed a cross to bear, and you were gracious enough to let me bear it with you. Jesus' challenge for us to pick up our cross and follow, you see, is an invitation to wholeness and life lived fully. Because he knew that our deepest need was to have a purpose and mission greater than ourselves to pick up and carry. I mean, Marine recruiters understand this. We need a few good men. And people after 9/11 signed up so fast for a cause greater than they were that they didn't have enough spots for them. Which, by the way, I think is one reason that church membership in wealthy mainline churches is lagging, because we haven't been clear about the call and the cause and the cost of serving. In order to make it easy to keep people coming, we provide all the incredible buildings, amazing program, and great professional staff to give members what they think they want, while church leaders fall for believing that the easier we make it, the more people will come. I think that's why we're losing members. Who needs a church that does not need me? What if instead of making it easy, we said to everyone who joins the church, every member every year, what if every member every year and every new member would have to recommit their membership by stating their mission, the cross in their life, the cause in their life that they were willing to carry into the world to follow and serve Christ? You talk about a pivot point. You see, that's repentance. That's changing your direction. Can you imagine a church where everyone bears their cross this way? Finds a mission for their life in the way of Christ's suffering love? Can you imagine? Jesus did.